Well, the global aviation industry has been under intense scrutiny after a series of deadly incidents at the end of last year. According to an industry safety report, 2024 was the deadliest for the industry in 6 years, even though the same report identifies air travel on a whole is getting safer. Now, to take us through what all this means, I'm joined by Natalee Johnston, an aviation safety professional and a former pilot with the Royal Australian Navy. Good to have you with us this evening. Now, let's get to the numbers first. The number of fatalities last year was 244, significantly more than the year before at 73. It's a significant rise, but doesn't quite tell us the whole story, does it, when it comes to safety on average?
No, it doesn't. The changes that we've seen, obviously, in those period of time that you're talking about, is obviously we've been through the global pandemic, significant drop in airline travel. The travel and amount of demand we've had in the aviation industry has increased. So the actual accident rate hasn't increased as significantly as the numbers suggest. I suppose if you looked at the raw fatality numbers, you would think it's becoming much more unsafe. But if you look at actually the fatality rates, with per flying hour, it's actually still on the way down, although still not as good as last year, but we have increased demand in the last 12 months.
Yes, of course, many people are then asking why 2024 was a particularly bad year.
I think there's going to be a number of factors involved in that, and I think part of it is the growing demand again as we're ramping back up to pre-pandemic numbers and where they projected it to be at this time with global demand of travel increasing. I think also part of it is that there is still a pilot shortage or a aviation industry shortage across all aviation professions. And because of that, there's greater demands on the individuals that are in there. So therefore, there's greater demand on experience, greater demands on hours flown and things like that. So there's a lot of human factors involved in potentially people not being able to perform at their best at all times because they are in a greater demand with a greater workload.
So if supply is outstripped by demand in the case, then are there serious concerns there in terms of commercial aviation safety in the long run?
No, I don't think so, because organisations like IATA and ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Authority, and CASA here in Australia, set regulations, and the aviation industry is very regulated and set around having safety management systems and good safety culture within the organisation. We also have a very good quality system within the aviation sector. So things like this, it will be looked at very stringently across the board to identify the causes of those accidents, and a lot of the final reports haven't been done. Some of them are due to weather events, like the severe turbulent event that happened to Singapore Airlines. And they'll be looking into the whys behind all of that to see if there are any trends. But because the structure of the industry is set up to catch any of those errors that are producing, so if you look at any of the major accidents that are in there, is actually there's a lot of positive things that have come out where things like the Japanese airlines that collided with the Coast Guard aircraft, the fatalities in that could have been much worse, but due to the competence and effectiveness of the crews.
Yes, and how much does equipment have to do with safety? Because, the other incident of the aircraft flipping over and not a single fatality there.
Well, that was amazing. So the engineering structure of it for the aircraft wing to actually snap off clean like a crumple zone in a car was designed so the fuselage stayed intact. So that meant that the people inside could stay safe and not have a hole torn into the side of the aircraft. So things like engineering factors, the construction of it and the maintenance of these aircraft is really important in making sure that they stay safe and provide the best service to the customers that travel in them.
Nevertheless, though, is it time, that perhaps the entire aviation industry looks at itself and says, we need to up our staffing levels to be able to match the demands of air travel, like in the case of, traffic control, piloting, as you say, because then, in the US, for example, we are seeing job cuts there where the Trump administration has fired about 1% of the staff at the FAA.
Yeah, and that is a little bit concerning. I think it goes beyond just the cuts. It's the level of insecurity potentially in your own job obviously impacts how well you can function. I think the industry is trying to do that, but due to the pandemic, there's also obviously a hole in training because a lot of training and training progression couldn't happen across the industry during that time. And because of the uncertainty over the aviation industry in that, so there's a gap in the experience level of who's out there. So as people used to retire and there was always a flow through, there's potentially a little bit of a gap of 3 or 4 years while we're still trying to build. The industry is very conscious of it, and I think they're working towards training people and looking at other options to how they can get more people through the system, still with the same qualification and competence that they've had in the past.
Of course, at the beginning of the year, there were so many incidents that were widely reported. The 2 crashes in the US, in Philadelphia and in Washington. Do you believe that that's dampened the confidence of customers in airlines?
I think there will be a level of that, particularly locally around those areas, because obviously it's very raw to them and it's very visible to what's going on around them. I think in general, though, when people do look at the bigger picture, is how much we travel and how many people get in the airport, how many accidents there are. The industry is still significantly safer than, driving between Canberra and Sydney. So it's actually there will be a dampener in a local effect, but I think as the industry increases and improvements go and we look at the whys behind those accidents and things get put in place to prevent that from reoccurring, then the confidence will regain again.
Yes, and you spoke, of course, of the disappointment in the job cuts at the FAA. Now, Donald Trump, he was quick to point the finger at diversity programs as a cause. Now, you are the first female pilot at the Royal Australian Navy, and how do comments like that make you feel, and to others who got there based on merit?
It is very challenging. I think a lot of us realise that there's diversity actually gives so much to any industry, diversity in thought, diversity in skill sets, the way we come about it, particularly in the aviation safety or any safety industries, we think about problem solving differently. So having those cuts made based on diversity is really frustrating because there's a lot of work across a lot of industries to actually grow their diversity because of the benefits it gives. So, and within aviation, if you take away all diversity, there will definitely be a pilot shortage because there will be not enough people to actually fill those positions without more diversity within the industry.
And finally, Natalee, safety is the #1 priority for all who work in the aviation sector, but is there anything that passengers should be doing to help improve safety on planes?
I think the big thing and the big lesson about the aircraft that flipped over is put your seatbelt on, listen to the crew, cabin crew, do everything they say. The Japanese Airlines accident actually went to that as well, is don't take your stuff with you and be very controlled and listen and be very aware that most things happen either on takeoff and landing. So keep your shoes on, pay attention and be alert in those times because that could be the point that saves your life.
Great advice. Natalee Johnston, really good to speak to you about aviation safety. Thank you so much.
Thank you.